Advent is a short season. It's especially short this year, but it is one that is filled with expectation. One of my favorite Advent hymns is "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus." Did I miss that one, or did you? Oh, darn. Okay. Oh, well, I'll sing it at home. So, the problem is that we like to get things fast. Now. But whatever happened to waiting?
Next week.
Next week. All right. No, now. No. All right, I can wait a week. I mean, Christmas Day is actually next week. And we haven't actually gotten to Mary or Joseph or baby Jesus or the star or any of that familiar stuff. We get kind of a rerun of last week's story. Except that this one is from John instead of Mark. An interesting point is that the gospel writer John doesn't call John the Baptist John the Baptist. He calls him John, which can be a little confusing for us. But this is in part because in John's gospel, John the Baptist's main role in the story is not as a baptizer. He's mainly in this story there to point to Jesus, to be a signpost, to show us the way to Jesus, and testify to the light. Now, testimony is the main thing that John gives us today. He gets in trouble with the local religious leadership and gets questioned. And then he tells them who he is not. Mark Allen Powell explains, quote, "He wasn't the light, he wasn't the Messiah, he wasn't the prophet. Who then was he? He was a witness, and he was a voice, albeit a voice telling people to prepare for someone else, someone whose sandal, thong, John was unworthy to untie." End quote. Normally, I discourage people from explaining who they are by saying what they're not, if you ever asked me. Episcopalians, in general, tend to fall into a trap of, if someone says, "Well, what's your church about?" And then we'll say, "Well, we're a lot like Roman Catholics, but less rules and guilt," or something like that, which is humorous, but not really an effective way of selling yourself, right? Doesn't really work in modern times. But it works for John today. John came to testify to Jesus' coming, spread the word far and wide, and we in turn are to do the same thing. Testimony, as a word, has a certain connotation in our language nowadays. It tends to apply mostly to law or trials, things like that, or it could conjure up images in our minds of altar calls and tent revivals. But it really just means speaking to your own experience. You can only speak to yourself, to what you know, not to what others know or have experienced or what other people believe, but what you know, what you have experienced, and what you believe. And it isn't difficult, yet it is very difficult to do this. Because we talk all the time. Talk and talk and talk. But what are we actually saying often? Why are we afraid to give our testimony of God in the world? I'm sure there are many reasons, but the main one I encounter is fear. Fear of rejection, or fear of getting laughed at or labeled some kind of religious nut. Now, if Mary had been afraid when the angel came to her, where would we be then? But these are valid fears. One of our main tasks as Christians, though, is to spread the good news of Jesus. And the only way to do that is via our testimony. And you don't need a fancy title or a degree to do this. And you don't need to, put on animal pelts and eat bugs and yell at people in the wilderness to do this either. You just need your own life and your own voice. And this is how churches grow. And this is how churches change the world. You have to just be yourself and love your neighbor and talk to your neighbors in love and talk about your own experiences of God in the world. We are able to speak to the light, all of us are, and testify to God's love. It's not always an easy thing. As Caroline Lewis writes, quote, "Giving witness to the light is not always comfortable, and it is sometimes very painful, but it exposes what needs to be brought out into the open, and in the end insists that the light will indeed shine, overcoming the darkness that has hidden so much for so long." Advent is no brief liturgical observance. Advent can never be passive, never be just waiting, never be just anticipating or expecting. No, Advent's call, vocation, and embodiment is witness. End quote. So at this time of year, we find ourselves waiting. Sometimes patiently and sometimes not so patiently, as I encountered when I tried to go shopping yesterday. Waiting for Christmas Day, the arrival of the baby Jesus. And we treat Christmas Day like it is an end to something, like it's a goal to be reached, and then it's over. But it's not. That's not how it works. It's only the beginning of our mission in the world. John points to Jesus in his stories, and we are supposed to point to Jesus as well. Just like Mary bore Jesus into the world, we are supposed to bear him into the world now. So how does God manifest God's self in us? And how do we express it? That's the question of Advent, and of all time, really, for every day. And that's our calling today. Testify and witness. And this doesn't have to be grand, on a grand scale, just in your everyday lives. Don't be passive. Be active in bearing witness and bearing Christ in the world. So I'm going to end with a quote from a long time ago from Meister Eckhart. He is a 13th century German monk and scholar. So I invite you to ponder this for the rest of Advent, even though it's only a week. Maybe you could ponder it a little longer than just a week. He wrote, "What good is it to me if this external birth of the divine Son takes place unceasingly, but does not take place within myself? And what good is it to me if Mary is full of grace, but I am not also full of grace? What good is it to me for the Creator to give birth to this Son if I do not also give birth to him in my time and in my culture? This then is the fullness of time, when the Son of God is begotten in me." Amen.